For a while now, Tales of Iron has been on my to-do list, and honestly, I'm glad I finally got around to it. I was expecting a simple side-scroller that only does one or two things well enough to get some notoriety without much else carrying the title. To say I was wrong would be an absolute understatement. Before I get ahead of myself, let's go through things properly. Developed by Oddbug Studio and published by United Label, Tales of Iron is a 2D RPG adventure with challenging combat based around a rat prince fighting off frogs who are invading his homeland.
The Bog Brothers clan were finally destroyed. Redgi knew they would not be the last.
You play as Redgi, a rat prince who is looking to inherit the throne from his aging father, the Rat King who united the rat clans against the Frogkin who had been slaughtering rat kind for centuries. There's news of the frogs raiding villages on their way to the Crimson Keep looking to destroy rat kind once and for all. Before crowning a successor, King Radis had his sons Redgi and Dennis duel one another to see who was worthy of leading the kingdom. After defeating Dennis, you are declared the heir to the throne.
His dream was about to come apart.
One of the game's main appeals is the art style, and it's probably the thing that catches most people's eyes. This cartoony look is unique in its own right and keeps it from looking like any other generic 2D title. Everything looks like it's been ripped straight out of a comic book. It's not as dark and inky as Darkest Dungeon, but the aesthetic choice does help set the tone of the game's setting. With that choice, you can see the best examples of this in the armor that Redgi wears or in the clothing of other rats. It's all dingy and worn looking, giving the impression of what it was like living in a medieval era. Sure, it can have bright and saturated color palettes at times, but everything is mainly dark and gloomy. As for the sound, it hits the right amount of ambience. It never goes absolutely quiet for too long and keeps levels interesting. It meets the bare minimum and can really be engaging depending on the area, but other than that, it's just fine. As for the dialogue, it comes in the form of speech bubbles, and honestly, it just adds to the experience. With a hand-drawn art style coupled with very, very simple dialogue, at times it can feel like you're playing through a fairy tale. This feeling is reinforced when the only speaker in the game describes what's happening as it's happening, like it's reading time.
The kingdom was restored, but Redgi could not enjoy peace until he knew it was free of threats. It was only restored above. Miners had sighted frogs below. Some were no longer willing to work. His squire thought it might have more to do with a strange rumbling. They say a monster prowls beneath.
Some of you may recognize that voice. For those of you who don't, that's Doug Cockle. And if you don't know who that is, here's a hint.
I'm a witcher.
I don't know how in the world they got him to narrate the game, but it fits perfectly. His narration and delivery makes it really feel like he's reading a story to you.
A strange, toxic world lay ahead. Redgi hoped he was prepared. The king was impressed by his brave mole friend. After the war, he hoped to know him and his strange people better.
this is just perfect. Whoever had this idea to have Geralt of Rivia narrate a tale of a kingdom of rats fighting off evil invading frogs deserves a raise. With a medieval-like setting, all the music in the game is there mainly just to complement it. Sometimes the music can sound a bit more chipper than what you'd expect in this kind of setting, and I think the main reason for this is that I think the developers leaned into this being more of an adventure game rather than a pure Souls-like. Don't get me wrong, there are tracks that do start out somber, but very few of them stay that way. They'll mostly go into a rhythm meant to give you the impression that you're on an adventure rather than fighting through a dilapidated world. The reason I think I'm a bit hung up on the music choice is because on the Steam page it's tagged as a Souls-like, and I can confidently say that this is not one of them. If you take that tag out of the equation, the music with its light-hearted tone that can sometimes be slow and full of emotion really fits the game, which is a benefit because with a tag like that, you'd only expect to hear a narrow range of music. Now, since this game mainly takes place on the 2D plane, environments are limited on what can be shown off, but these devs knew what they were doing with this limitation. Environments have tons of character in the background. Everything from homes just off the beaten path, seeing your castle go from ruins to being restored, or hints of a long-lost world. They could have easily just made generic room after generic area after generic cave, but they didn't. They seized the opportunity to put a lot of little touches to these screens to add just a little bit more lore to the world. Now here's where I do have a complaint. The way these levels are utilized can inadvertently punish the player. What do I mean? Well, these levels are only meant to be explored in a certain way. Here's an example. I had progressed through the story up to a certain point, and instead of continuing the story, I decided to go explore a bit. Maybe find some sweet loot or maybe a few collectibles. Eventually, I found a boss room with no boss. So I had to backtrack all the way out of the cave system and pick up a specific side quest in order to spawn that boss. So I had to go all the way back to where I had just been just to fight a boss. So what the devs effectively did was waste mine and many other players' time by not having that boss active anyway. Not only that, they've effectively discouraged players from playing the game how they want. You don't want players to feel like they're being railroaded into only completing quests as opposed to exploring. Hopefully they fix that design flaw in the sequel, because let's be honest, there's no better feeling than having a quest item already on you when having a quest issued to you, or in this case, having already killed a boss before the game asks you to.
A new hand touches the beacon.
There are 3 different difficulties for the game. Fairy Tale mode, which is easy mode, Tales of Iron mode, the way the game was meant to be played, and Bloody Whisker mode for those players who can make it to the end of Simon Says. For this review, I played in Tales of Iron mode because I have nothing to prove and I play games to have fun. As you can probably tell by now, most of the gameplay is attacking, blocking, and dodging. But for as simple as the actual moment-to-moment gameplay is, it can be pretty tense and engaging. Having to memorize an enemy's attack and reacting accordingly is one thing, but fighting multiples of the same enemy types while brand new ones make their way onto the screen is a whole nother. While at times combat can be a bit repetitive, it does stay challenging. One of my favorite things the title does is that you're regular enemies don't have health bars. Instead, they have wounds that become more and more prominent depending on how much damage they've taken. The effect works really well too when Redgi gets covered in the blood of his enemies as he fights them. It's a pretty neat effect, and I'd take this over a standard health bar any day of the week. One of the few RPG elements this game has is its gear and weapon options. What's different here is that all the weapons and armor you have equipped can weigh Redgi down. You can equip him with some armor that can take some punishment at the cost of his dodge speed being affected. This goes for his weapons too. He may be able to hit harder and do more damage with heavier weapons, but again, he'll be slowed down. You can also coat your weapons in poison, which does bonus damage, and that's it, I guess. It's not like The Witcher where you have several oils to choose from, it's just one that works on every enemy, which is fine. It's a bit of extra damage, but I feel like this was unfinished. Your armor already has resistances to several different enemy types, so it would make sense for there to be a poison system that follows the same logic. I'm sure it was planned at some point in development and probably got cut because it feels like it's still there anyway, just not enemy specific. You also have ranged weapons to use for more technical fights. These are neat, but there's only like 3 in the game, so hopefully there will be more options in the sequel.
Pistols put holes in people. Rifles put holes through people. Shotguns at the right range with the right load will physically remove a chunk of shit off your opponent and throw that shit on the floor.
If you're having trouble during fights, hunt down some ingredients so Redgi's brother can cook him some health upgrades, or maybe hunt down some collectibles for some sweet gear. As for replay value, that's honestly up to you. If you want to run through the game a second time on the hardest difficulty, then go for it. Just be prepared. As for New Game Plus, it doesn't exist, which I don't feel like this title needs it. The game effectively tells you that you're about to fight the final boss, and that's your opportunity to finish a few side quests, hunt down some other bosses, or find the last few collectibles. Sure, on New Game Plus, the bosses will have a bit more health and deal a bit more damage, but at that point, why not just play the game on Bloody Whisker difficulty? Surprisingly, this game got some post-launch support. Oddbug Studio added 2 new DLCs, one of which is just more enemies in the arenas, and the other is a mini-campaign called Bright Fir Forest. So even after beating the game, you'll still have plenty to do. Playing the game from beginning to end took me roughly 6 hours, and for some reason the game has me clocked at like 4 hours and 45 minutes. I think that they did this for speedrunners, I guess. That way the game automatically takes out load screen times and cutscene times, like that makes sense. Either way, this is a 6-hour experience with a good chunk of side content and post-game content. Polish-wise, I only found one standout issue. At one point in the game, there's an NPC you meet who takes you across the river, and on the other side, he becomes a disembodied hand. Is this a huge issue? Not really, but it's literally the only glaring issue I ran into. For the story, I wish I could go through the motions of the story like I typically do, highlighting good and bad plot points with my opinions on how well the entire thing is written. But here, I just can't. There's no opportunity for me to really criticize it because it's so basic. I'm not saying the story is bad or anything, because it is engaging the entire way through, but once you boil it down, everything just becomes another reason to fight a boss. Help this town by fighting a boss. Help the rangers by fighting a boss. Fight mini bosses to progress the story. There are some neat bits here and there though, so it's not all bland. Before I get into the story, I have to point out one negative that I could not stand during my playthrough. At several points throughout the story, you're required to spend gold to either rebuild something or buy something in order to progress. Well, the only way to get gold is by completing side quests, which isn't all that bad, but going back to my point earlier, you're punished for exploring the world without an active side quest. So it creates this weird situation where you're downright disincentivized to explore the map on your own, but then the game's main story makes you explore the map in the form of side quests when maybe you don't want to. It's just odd to experience and goes back to my point of allowing the player to complete quests or kill bosses without having to be told. With that complaint out of the way though, click here if you don't want spoilers.
Woke this time from a dream of blood and frog spawn, finding he had neither a crown, nor a kingdom, nor a father.
After waking up, Redgi sees his kingdom in ruins and his only option now is to fight back. But first he has to rescue his brothers, the first being the cook and the second being a blacksmith. While on the quest to rescue his brothers, he saves the local Longtail village and recruits the help of the local rangers. After saving his brothers, Redgi spends what little money he has repairing the Crimson Keep and Longtail village. Do you see what I mean? Like, this is just me describing what's happening without any personal input. The entire story is like this. Again, not that it's a bad thing or anything, but you're not really playing this title for the story. Anyway, after repairing the keep, Redgi and one of his brothers start clearing out the surrounding areas of frog spawn and other nasties that litter the world. While clearing out a mine, a bridge collapses and separates the two. Redgi must now navigate this new world alone until he makes a new friend, that is. With the help of his new friend, they navigate their way back to the surface, and with a few more fights in between, Redgi slays the Frog King and the game ends.
The war chief was dead, and the kingdom saved. But what did it matter if his brother was gone?
Like I said, you're not playing this for the story. Although it does keep you interested, there's nothing beneath surface level. Are you ready for the kicker of this whole review? Are you sure? This is Oddbug's second game. I'm not kidding. The only other title they have under their belt is a PSVR game they released back in 2017. We are 2 for 2 on this channel for indie devs hitting a home run on their second title, and it's honestly fucking wild. Now, is Tales of Iron a good game? I can say without a shadow of a doubt that Tales of Iron is a good game. I can easily see the heart and soul the devs poured into the title, and the results speak for themselves. Their vision of a challenging game that isn't overly punishing shines as an example for other devs to aspire to. Sure, many people may only play it once and put it down forever, but I don't think anyone will regret their time spent with the game. Should you give it a try? Absolutely. Whether you pay full price or get it for a killer discount, you should set a day aside just to no-life it. I didn't really run into enough issues or annoyances that absolutely ruined the experience. Yeah, I would have changed the side quest system a bit, but that's not an absolute deal breaker. From its unique art style, interesting world, sometimes repetitive combat, and fun boss design, Tales of Iron is an absolute gem of an indie title that I can easily recommend to anyone.